Hello everyone, and welcome to the continuation of our Chapter 4 lecture, which will begin with connective tissue, we'll venture into muscle tissue, and finally nervous tissue. So our connective tissue is very abundant. It's found all throughout our body in every single organ, and it's going to consist of cells that are separated by an extracellular matrix. We have a ton of diverse types, which you can tell just by looking at this list of all of our different connective tissue throughout our body. So we'll venture into each specific type and some of the cells and extracellular matrix that we have in here. Because this is so vast, we are also going to have a variety of important functions. So let's talk about those functions here. Oh, this picture turned out really blurry. I apologize. But one of the main functions for connective tissue is that it'll assist in enclosing or encapsulating certain organs, such as our liver and our kidneys. It can also form different layers of certain structures. So for example, when we go into the cadaver lab, you guys will see that our muscle has these different connective tissue layers. And the way we separate some of these is just by using our hands, because they're natural delineations created by these connective tissue layers in which we can separate one muscle from another. They're also going to be a part of our tendons and ligaments. Remember that tendons are going to connect muscle to bone, and ligaments will connect bone to bone. And these layers that we discussed of connective tissue can also help separate out arteries and veins and nerves throughout our body as well. We have a function as support and movement, so our bones would be a great example of that, along with our cartilage in there. Our bones are going to give us rigid support, and our cartilage gives us kind of a rigid support, but will also have a little bit of a cushion there for us. It'll serve more for structures of our nose and our ears and the surfaces or the ends of our bones. Next, we have storage. So our storage would consist mostly of adipose tissue or fat, as I have listed there. These little adipocytes are going to have a ton of high energy lipids within it that we can break down and gain energy from. Our bones will also help to store minerals such as calcium and phosphate, so that's another example there. We also have the function of cushioning and insulating. Once again, our fat or adipose tissue is going to assist us in doing that. Especially below our dermis, we have our subcutaneous tissue that will help cushion any pressure that we have, and also insulate us to help conserve heat within our body. Next, we have transporting substances. I have blood listed there. We have a ton of nutrients, hormones, enzymes, gases that are going to move throughout our blood, and our immune system will also function within our connective tissue as far as transport goes, by allowing these immune cells to go over to areas where we have infection, or there's a pathogen trying to cause infection. Our lymphatic system will also assist in transporting as well, by allowing our immune cells to move throughout our lymphatic system. Lastly, we have protect, and I have cells of our immune system here, so this kind of goes hand in hand with transporting them throughout our body. We are going to want to move these immune cells to certain areas of our body to protect us against certain toxins or any type of inflammation or tissue injury. Next, we have the different cells of our connective tissue. We'll be talking about some specific ones. I have your bone cells pictured here on the right side, but throughout our connective tissue, we're going to have a ton of specialized cells that'll produce the extracellular matrix. So you're going to see these suffixes at the end of these cell terms. So this might be a little bit of review for you guys, but blast is always going to mean that we are building something, that we are creating or building matrix. So I put this example here of an osteoblast, which comes from an osteoprogenitor cell, which is basically like a bone stem cell. And what they do is they line up around this, not this one here, but these osteoblasts line up along the bone matrix, and they will secrete more matrix onto the bone that we have existing. Anything that ends with site helps to maintain that matrix. So we have a ton of osteocytes here within the bone matrix that are helping to maintain it, and this is what an osteocyte looks like. We also have the example of a chondrocyte. If you remember from medical terminology, chondro means cartilage. So these chondrocytes are maintaining cartilage matrix. And lastly, we have class. And class, I always think cut. And here's an example of an osteoclast, which is going to help to break or cut away our bone down. And this really assists in bone remodeling, so that we can help shape the bone into whatever shape we need as we're growing. Next, we have some more cells, and I'm trying to think, sorry guys, I'm going to go ahead real quick here. I'm going to add a cell to this list because it really needs to be in here, and that is going to be a fibroblast or fibrocyte. That is known as the principal cell of connective tissue. They are going to be the ones in connective tissue that will secrete elastic fibers and collagen. So they are very important. Those fibroblasts, once again, are the ones secreting the elastic fibers and the collagen. Our fibrocytes, if you remember cyte as a suffix, that means it's going to maintain that tissue, that connective tissue matrix. Anyway, moving on, let's continue with the list that we have here. We have adipocytes first, and that is going to be common in some tissues, of course, within our adipose tissue, but we'll also have some in the dermis of the skin and some cartilage, although it's rare in there. And like we've mentioned before, this adipocyte has a ton of lipids within it. So we have this large lipid droplet here, and it kind of pushes all the cytoplasm to the side as well as the nucleus, so that the cell really functions in storage of this high energy fat. If you look at a histology slide, I don't think I put one in here. If you look at a histology slide, they almost look like a bunch of alveoli because you just see this thin ring around the cell and the inside looks white because of the fat in there. So don't be fooled by that when it comes to histology slides. We will also have our mast cells, which are common beneath membranes and along blood vessels because they are there to release heparin, histamine, and proteolytic enzymes in response to injury. So anytime we have a broken blood vessel, your mast cells are there to kind of alert your immune system that there's some type of trauma or infection, and to come and repair that. Next, we have our white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. They're going to respond to injury or infection. So we'll learn a lot more about these guys in our immune system lectures, but we're going to have an accumulation of lymphocytes within an area that has any injury or infection, like we mentioned, within our connective tissues. And usually we'll find these white blood cells beneath the epithelial lining of certain parts of our digestive system as well. Next, we have macrophages, and this is a picture of a macrophage here. Don't they look so cool with these extensions out here, killing bacteria or about to phagocytize bacteria or gobble it up? And so they're helping providing protection for our body. We have two different types. We have fixed macrophages, and that means that they are going to stay in position within the connective tissue. So they're not traveling throughout the body. Examples of this would be in our CNS or central nervous system, we have microglia. So these are specific macrophages that stay within our central nervous system. Another example would be in our liver, those Kupffer cells that we'll learn about. I think your textbook uses a different name now, it's changed. But anyway, these are liver cells that are going to stay in position and not move throughout the body. So the other macrophages that do move throughout the body, these are called wandering macrophages. They move in an amoeboid movement, kind of like crawling through our connective tissue, searching for pathogens. Next, we have our platelets, and these are coming from fragments of a megakaryocyte, which is a hematopoietic cell. And these platelets are there to assist in clotting. So more on that in our cardiovascular system. And the last one we're going to mention here are undifferentiated mesenchyme. These are going to be stem cells. You see a picture of them right over here. They almost look like little sperm cells, but if you look up close to them, they don't have only one tail. They're actually kind of star-like and stretch out in different directions. They have the potential to differentiate into any adult cell type. So they're kind of like that 5-year-old that is like, I want to be a firefighter. Well, I want to be a lawyer, and so on. They could be anything they want. So they can become a fibroblast, they could become a nerve cell, they can become a smooth muscle cell. It doesn't matter. Let's move into our extracellular matrix. So this is kind of the background of our connective tissue. This is our matrix. And our extracellular matrix is made up of 3 different components. We have our protein fibers, which is what we're going to talk about on this slide. We have ground substance, and we have fluid. So our protein fibers are going to be collagen, reticular, and elastic. So our collagen is going to be the most common, and what you're going to look for on your histology slides are these thicker bands of pink. You can see me outlining one right here. Here's another collagen fiber right here, and I know your APR has some great pictures of collagen as well. And our collagen, I don't know if I mentioned this, is the most abundant, is the most common protein in our body. It is also going to be very strong and flexible, but it is not elastic. That's for our elastic fibers to take care of. We're also going to have many different types of collagen. There are at least 20 different types. The most well-known types are type 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they are, remember, secreted by fibroblasts. Our type 1 is going to be the most abundant type of cartilage, and they have a rope-like strength. So they're going to contribute to the tendons and ligaments and our skin and also bone. Moving into our reticular fibers, we have to use a special stain in order to see this in our histology slides, but that is going to be this structure here, the very dark purple, almost black lines that you see here. These are reticular fibers, and this is what I like to call the filler flower of our extracellular matrix, because that's what they do. They fill spaces between the tissues and organs. They are very similar to collagen, but they are much more thinner, and so they're chemically distinct from our collagen. They're just not as strong. They're very short, thin fibers, and they're also going to branch in the way that you see here to create networks. Let's talk about elastic fibers, which we're going to move back up to this top picture for. There's these very thin lines that'll be purple or dark purple that stretch on out. These two are secreted by our fibroblasts, and they're made up of a protein called elastin. They allow us to have the ability to return to our original shape after being stretched or compressed. So kind of like a rubber band. As it stretches, it's going to go back. And this allows for our elasticity within our skin, our lungs, and also our arteries. other matrix molecules. So now we're going to talk about the second component of our extracellular matrix, which is going to be ground substance. So this too is kind of in the background. Our extracellular matrix is really the background of what's going on in connective tissue. So we have our we have our ground substance, and these are all the different components that contribute to our ground substance. I think this can get a little confusing here, so what I'm going to do is switch to another screen and draw it out for you. Okay, so what we're going to do is draw out a proteoglycan aggregate, and this has all the components within our that we would have within our ground substance. So first I've drawn out here, and you have a picture similar to this in your book. It's figure 4.5, but I think it helps to kind of walk through the steps. So we have this main stem, which is going to be your hyaluronic acid. Okay. And then stemming off from there, we are going to have our proteoglycan monomers. So I'm still trying to remember all these buttons. So coming off of there, we have these proteoglycan monomers. So that is a proteoglycan monomer. What this monomer is made up of is our protein core. So let's draw that in first. Apparently I like all the same colors. Okay. So there's our protein core. And extending off of there are going to be something called glycosaminoglycans, or a lot of people just refer to them as GAGs. So let me draw those extending on off. These are actually connected like that. So I'm going to put GAGs. Glycosamino. Is that word long enough? Now we have many GAGs within our body, but the one your book is going to mention is the chondroitin sulfate. So that's what they have pictured for you over here as your GAGs. So what I want you to understand is that these two combined, okay, your protein core along with your GAG, whatever it is, starting to lag, this is that proteoglycan monomer. Okay, so those two put together. Now, we need something in order to connect this to our hyaluronic acid. So what we're going to use is going to be a link protein. So that's our next component. So we'll add a link protein over here and a link protein over here. For some reason my pen is lagging. Okay, so with all of that put together, we get obviously a lot more pieces there, but that is what is creating this entire structure, which would be our proteoglycan aggregate. Sorry for the sloppy, archaic looking writing, but anyway. Why is this important in our body? It's going to help to trap large quantities of water, which will allow them to go back to their original shape when we compress it or it becomes deformed. So these are major components within our cartilage. Without having these proteoglycan aggregates, we can have issues such as dwarfism or spinal misalignment. We can have craniofacial deformities. It's just continuing. It has a lot to do with our bone structure. So let's go back to our lecture here. The other thing we have in here are going to be adhesive molecules, and they're going to help to hold our protein aggregate. So here's the actual figure I was discussing together. And this is going to be a different type of molecule in each of our different connective tissues. So we will have chondronectin in our cartilage, osteonectin in bone, and fibronectin within our fibrous connective tissue. Okay, next we have our embryonic connective tissue, and we'll kind of explore this a little bit more in Anatomy 3 when we discuss human development. So we already mentioned mesenchyme a little bit, how we have that star shape to them. This is like a stem cell. It can become almost any type of cell that it wants. It is primarily going to form mesoderm. Now I know we haven't talked about mesoderm yet. There are 3 different types of embryonic tissues. There's endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm. I didn't want to venture into that too much just yet, so just kind of hang on to that piece of information, and we'll explore that more in Anatomy 3. But what I do want you to know is that there's a delicate type of collagen fibers in this matrix, and it is more of a semi-fluid type of matrix. It's kind of a little bit more gelish. We're also going to have mucous connective tissue. This is really only found in the umbilical cord in Wharton's jelly. So if you look at a sliced umbilical cord, we of course have our 2 umbilical arteries and 1 umbilical vein, and surrounding that is going to be Wharton's jelly. So it's just a mucus type of connective tissue. All right, our adult connective tissues. So now we are really going to discuss the difference between our loose and dense connective tissue, which is under the category of connective tissue proper. Our loose connective tissue, which you see here pictured as areolar tissue, this is going to have a ton of collagen fibers that are going to be loosely arranged. So here in pink we see our collagen fibers, and then those thicker purple lines are going to be the elastic fibers, and then smaller dots here of dark purple, those are going to be our fibroblasts. Now our dense connective tissue, here we see regular dense connective tissue. This is going to be a little bit more organized, and we have a lot more collagen fibers, and they are in thick bundles. So all this pink that you see kind of in a straight row, that is representative of our dense connective tissue. We have other supporting connective tissues like cartilage and bone. We see cartilage pictured here to be specific hyaline cartilage. I'll tell you how you can tell the difference. And then we'll take a look at some slides of bone and our fluid connective tissue of blood in the following slides. So first we have our areolar or loose connective tissue. Once again, we have a lot of collagen here, some elastic fibers, and you see pictured the nucleus of a fibroblast. This is going to help us in our loose packing of materials of most of our organs and tissues, and this is mostly known as stroma. We are going to have it serve within our subcutaneous tissue, so it's attaching our skin, which includes our epidermis and dermis, to our underlying tissues. That subcutaneous tissue is also known as superficial fascia and hypodermis. So it's almost like there's 3 or 4 different names for this. So if you're looking at this image, here's our epidermis and dermis that creates our skin, and then this loose connective tissue that you see here is referred to as superficial fascia, subcutaneous tissue, subcutaneous layer, or hypodermis. So it's good to know all of those names. We'll have also in here some reticular fibers, although you can't see it in this image because it has to have a special stain, but it's in there. And we're going to have all 5 types of cells that we discussed previously. Okay, somehow my slides got mixed up here. So let's continue with our loose connective tissue and discuss adipose tissue. Remember that these are going to be large cells and they are going to be loosely arranged with collagen and reticular fibers. And we also have some elastic fibers in here too. So when you look at these histology plates, you really don't see a ton of, like we said, a ton of the extracellular matrix structures. You're just going to see these large adipocytes. Here in the brown adipose tissue, you see more of an accumulation of color, but we'll talk about those differences in a moment. First, we'll talk about our yellow or white adipose tissue. It is the most abundant type and it's widely distributed throughout our body. And the appearance of these cells are more white at birth and then it starts to yellow with age. And that is because we start consuming a pigment within yellow and red fruits and vegetables called carotenes. That we are going to metabolize and use as vitamin A, which is great for our vision health. We'll see that we have that scant ring of cytoplasm that I was mentioning earlier surrounding our single large lipid droplet. So all of this in white here, that is our lipid droplet. And our nuclei are going to be flattened and eccentric. So here's a good flattened nuclei for your viewing. Next, we have our brown adipose tissue. This is only found in specific areas of our body, like our axilla, our armpit, our neck, and near our kidneys. The reason it has that brown pigment to it is we have this cytochrome pigment that is in the numerous amount of mitochondria that we have in these parts of our body. And also, it is very abundant in blood supply. We are going to use our brown fat more to generate heat. So as you can imagine, this is very important to make sure that they are regulating their body temperature well. And we are seeing that this also plays a similar role in adults. And you'll see in these cells that the nuclei are round and almost centrally located, whereas we see huge difference here in our white adipose tissue where it's pushed off to the side. Now let's talk about our reticular tissue. So reticular tissue we're really going to find in areas where we have lymphatic tissue and our hemopoietic tissues. So we'll see that network of branching within our reticular fibers, and we also have our reticular cells as well as some white blood cells amongst this type of tissue. The spaces between these cells are going to also contain dendritic cells, which are antigen presenting cells, and we'll get more into that in our immune system lectures. So here's an example of where we would find reticular fibers. We have our lymph node. The spleen, which is a lymphatic organ, is another example that we can find this reticular tissue. The reticular cells that we have within this tissue are going to be responsible for producing the reticular fibers we find within them. Now let's talk about our dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. Actually, before we start this, I just want to mention that with our dense connective tissue, we divide it into two subcategories. We have dense regular connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue. We can further break down our dense regular connective tissue into collagenous and also elastic. So you'll see kind of a branching effect happening here. Not branching. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that, where's my pen? This is how I want to paint this in your mind. So if my pen wants to cooperate. So we have our dense connective tissue. I want you to separate out regular and irregular. Anyway, I won't write it all out. And regular is further subdivided into our collagenous and elastic. That's a little bit more clear, right? Okay, so let's talk about our dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. Of course, it's called this because it's abundant in collagen fibers, and it's going to resist stretching. So we're going to really find this within our tendons and our ligaments. Remember that our tendons connect muscles to bone, whereas ligaments are connecting bone to bone. And when we look at this within our slide, it kind of has a wavy pattern to it. So the pink, the light pink here, and kind of the darker and light pink that you're seeing here, those are all the collagen fibers. And then dispersed throughout here, we have the nuclei of our fibroblasts. Next, we have our dense, regular, elastic connective tissue, and these are going to be found in our ligaments of our vocal cords. So this would be in the larynx, and we have them pictured right over here. These would be our true vocal folds, or also called your ventricular folds. And then the pink that you see on the side here, these are known as your false vocal cords or your vestibular vocal fold. So false one is used more for creating pressure within our body. The true ones are used more for vocalization. The other place you can find this is your nuchal ligament. And this is a ligament that is spanning from this external occipital protuberance. So it's like that bump on the back of your occipital bone, and it expands down the spinous processes of your cervical vertebrae. So we'll discuss this more when it comes to your muscular system and anatomy too. These collagen fibers are giving strength here for when you shout, but elastic fibers are going to be more prevalent here. Next, we have our dense, irregular, collagenous connective tissue. So here we have our protein fibers, mostly collagen once again, arranged in a random orientation. So it just kind of looks like a big mess in here. You're like, what is going on? But all of this pink is still serving as the connective tissue, as the collagen. And we have some cells in here, some nuclei of our fibroblasts. And where we're going to find this is our innermost layer of our dermis of our skin. So when we look at this slide here, and I'll compare it to the illustration on the right of your screen, when we look here, we see your epidermis, and then we have your dermis, epidermis and your dermis. So your dermis is actually subdivided into two layers. We have this layer up here. You can see, well, you can't see the tissue too well, but anyway, that upper layer is going to be loose areolar tissue. The dense irregular connective tissue will be all of this down in here. So you can kind of see how we have that irregular, messy look to it as far as the collagen fibers in here. This is a nice little close-up of exactly what it looks like. So again, your collagen fibers and those fibroblasts in there. We'll also see it as a part of the scars that can form on our body and it forming the capsules around our kidney and spleen. Next, we have our dense, irregular, elastic connective tissue. So I forgot to add this to, do I still have it up here? I don't. So I forgot to add this to your irregular division too. So that too is going to have a collagenous as well as elastic component to it, just like your dense, regular connective tissue. Anyway, we are looking at our irregular, elastic connective tissue. We could see that we have these bundles of connective, I keep saying connective tissue, these bundles of our collagen and the elastic fibers, and they're oriented in many directions. It still kind of looks a little organized, but it's very jumbly in here, which is why it's irregular. We're going to find this in the walls of our elastic arteries. So these are kind of our the largest types of arteries that you can have. So we give an example of the aorta, and they're strong, yet they're elastic. So these can withstand the highest of pressures within our cardiovascular system. Not too high, of course. All right, that brings us to cartilage. Now we have three different types of cartilage, but all of them will have chondrocytes within their matrix. So these are examples of chondrocytes within their matrix that will help to maintain the cartilage matrix. These chondrocytes live in little homes called lacuna. Lacunae for plural, lacuna for singular. So they just wrap themselves around those chondrocytes. The type of cartilage is going to be based on the components within their matrix. So we will get into that on the next slide. But they have a firm type of consistency, so they're going to be a little bit more semi-rigid, not as rigid as bone, but of course not as fluid as blood. Our ground substance here are going to be those proteoglycans that we drew out and our hyaluronic acid complex together to trap large amounts of water so that if they become deformed or compressed, they can reform to their original shape. They're also going to be avascular and have no nerve supply, which is why they heal very slowly. Instead, their nutrients are going to kind of diffuse into the cartilage. And surrounding our cartilage, we are going to have a perichondrium. So that's what you see pictured over here. This is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue, and we will have our fibroblasts that can differentiate and become our chondroblasts to help secrete more cartilage matrix here. All right, now we get into the different types. They are hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic. So let's talk about hyaline first. I always say that when you look at cartilage, it looks like there's a bunch of eyes looking at you. So here you see the whites of the eyes, and then the middle, that nucleus, is serving as your pupil. So here we will have a ton of collagen fibers. It's that pinkish background that you see here. It's pretty evenly distributed. You don't see it really delineating from other pieces of cartilage. And we're also going to have proteoglycan within the matrix. And this helps to create that nice smooth surface in our articulations. So here we have a knee joint, and we can see that hyaline cartilage is at the very end of our femur, the distal portion of the femur. We also have some on the tibia as well. Locations for where we find this will be our rib cage. We have costal cartilages. We can talk about this in lab as far as location. The trachea and also our bronchi. Again, we're getting really strong support here and some flexibility. But hyaline cartilage is going to be pretty rigid. You don't want it to move around too much. It's also going to help create the embryo in the womb so that as that fetus is going to age and be born and turn into a child, all of that hyaline is going to start to turn into our skeleton. It's going to ossify to become our skeleton. It's also involved in growth that's going to increase our bone length, and we will discuss that more in our skeletal system lectures. All right, next we have fibrocartilage. And we don't have this in too many locations throughout our body. We have very thick collagen fibers within fibrocartilage. So you see this in the blue here. Sometimes we use a little bit different staining for our fibrocartilage, and it's distributed within our proteoglycan matrix once again. This is slightly compressible, but it is very tough, which is why we want this to serve as our cartilage within our vertebrae. So it helps create these intervertebral discs, as well as our menisci within the knee, within our jaw, and also, I don't have it listed here, but you will also find fibrocartilage within your interpubic disc, or that pubic symphysis. And this joint is only going to move during childbirth. Okay, last type of cartilage we have is elastic. And you can see a little bit of pink in the background here as far as our collagen, but mostly the difference here is going to be our elastic fibers. And in the background we have some proteoglycans too. But this allows it to be rigid as as well as having elastic properties. So where we're going to find this is this external ear or the pinna or the auricle. The epiglottis, which is found in the larynx, that is that structure that will flip on down to cover our larynx so that food and water or whatever other liquids you're drinking will go into the esophagus instead of down into your respiratory tubes. And the other place we'll find it is in the auditory tubes, which would be the canal in your ear. All right, supporting connective tissues, we're going to get into bone here. This is going to be the most rigid type of connective tissue that we can have. We have our osteocytes within our bone matrix. I apologize, this is a little bit blurry here, but anytime you see this pink layer here, that is our bone matrix. And these little nuclei that you see here, those are our osteocytes maintaining this bone matrix. Now, along the outside here, we are going to have some osteoblasts that'll build and secrete matrix. And these larger cells, we have one here, we have another one here, and another one here. These are osteoclasts that are going to break down the bone. What else do we need to mention here? Our organic component of our bone will be the collagen fibers, and our inorganic would be our hydroxyapatite. Anyways, forgetting something in there. All right, our osteocytes too are going to live within their home called a lacuna. So what we're looking at up here is what spongy bone looks like. These tree trunk looking like structures here are called osteocytes. These we're only going to find within our compact bone. So in the middle here we have a central artery, and then along these rings we are going to find the osteocytes living within their lacunae. So there's one, there's another one, okay? They're all over the place. So this is really in comparison of spongy bone and compact bone. Our spongy bone, we say, have trabeculae. So we're looking at the ends of the bone here, and they really have these irregular plates kind of hitting one another. It looks like a sponge. It's just all randomized. So you can see the plates up close here in this histology slide. This is the bone matrix, and then lying around the outside, we would have those osteoblasts. Inside would be our osteocytes maintaining the bone, and then we might have some, I think this one might be one here, an osteoclast that would reabsorb the bone. Okay. The other type again is compact bone, and these have the tree trunks, I called them, but concentric circle layers that are moving around the central canal. The central canal is where we're getting our blood supply, and we will find our compact bone on the periphery of bone. So if we look along the shaft of the bone, we will find our compact bone. All right, our last connective tissue type is going to be blood. And blood is made up of a couple different components. Oop, that's not what I wanted. If we break down the components of blood, we have plasma, which serves as about 55%. This is mostly made up of water, and we have some ions in there and some other things. Won't dive into that too deep, but we are also going to have our formed elements that make up our blood. So we will have this buffy coat here that contains our white blood cells and platelets, and the heaviest of all of our blood cells will be our red blood cells. So that makes up the majority within our formed elements, about 45%. So when we look at a slide of blood, obviously this isn't an actual slide, but you're going to see in the background a light pink reddish color. Those are your red blood cells. And actually, let me switch to this view. So this is what you're looking at. These are your red blood cells. And then these larger cells that are going to be purple or bluish, these are all of the different types of white blood cells that you have. And we'll get into the different ones in our cardiovascular system. And then you'll see these little tiny guys. They're represented over here. Those are going to be your platelets. And those, again, have to do with clotting. Your hemopoietic tissue is going to help form blood cells. The area where we can find this is our bone marrow. So within those long bones, mostly are going to have the red bone marrow, and that's where we get the formation of these blood cells. We also have yellow bone marrow, but that's mostly going to contain fat. Okay, I lied. We have one more slide on connective tissue. We have hemopoietic tissue. Once again, this helps form blood cells. It's found in our bone marrow. We have red bone marrow, again, where our blood cells are going to be created. And we have it supported by a framework of reticular fibers. So all along this area here, we have support of those reticular fibers. The yellow bone marrow is going to contain fat, so adipose tissue. And as a child is going to grow, that yellow marrow is going to replace a lot of the red bone marrow that we have within our long bones. Okay, I'm going to make a separate screencast on muscle tissue and nervous tissue. That one shouldn't be nearly as long as this connective tissue lecture.